So this is a little tutorial walkthrough thing that I'm doing because a couple people have reached out and asked about how I draw Transformers in a very specific kind of way. I have a very anatomical feel to them. They've got a lot of shape, but they still mostly look like Transformers. It's not a particular strength of mine because I'm quite lazy. But I think, if they're still soft and they look human, but they also definitely look like Transformers, then I win. And so a couple people have reached out, and this is my little explanation thing. Yeah. So first off is the design challenge, and feel free to skip this, but I like to draw. I also hate drawing a lot. I draw comics for a living, so I have to be fast. I have really shit stamina. I'm a really lazy artist, and I lose focus really, really fast. And the people at IDW and the people who draw very, very detailed Transformers are completely off the shits. I have no idea how they managed to pump out all those pages and they've got all those fine little details. Oh, I could never. So first and foremost is that I have mad respect for them for doing that, and I think that having that kind of style diversity is really, really good. I actually really like how many different ways there are of drawing a Transformer. I think it's healthy for the community. But this is for people who have tried to draw it and either get exhausted because it takes so long to get all the details in, or they're way, way, way more comfortable with human anatomy and they can't get their robots to feel like robots. And they hate to draw square. I hate drawing square too. If you hate drawing square, this is a good guide for you. You will be drawing some square, but you'll see. So first things first is I've reverse engineered a couple of the techniques that I've seen used by designers, smart designers in Transformers that try something different. And then, based off how successful or unsuccessful I was with them, I implemented new ones. And another forward, I'm not the first person to do this. I'm not reinventing the wheel. I've seen a couple people do something similar to this, and this is just me spewing my thoughts into the void. So Transformers provide a really unique design challenge. They have to transform. They have to turn into a car. They have to fold into a streamlined shape. If your box boy doesn't fold into a box car, then it's not really a Transformer, is it? Which is kind of tough. And especially this kind of challenge exists if you're taking the design really seriously. If you were trying to pitch this as an official style guide. They also have to be toys. So plastic is a really big choking hazard, and things snap, right? So if you have a really complicated design, and things are falling off and a child chokes on it, then it's failed as a design because you didn't account for that. We don't want to kill the kids. And also, if you have really finicky, overly detailed designs, things that are not a shape, then that's really expensive to manufacture because you have a lot of things to screw together. So that's something to consider. Another challenge is their iconic designs. People have a lot of G1 is not a well-designed show at all, but people have a lot of fondness for it, and I understand that because I do too. So you have a lot of fan favorites that you can't really touch in drastic ways. They still have to kind of look like their original. Megatron's a big one. Starscream kind of gets thrown around a little bit. I think he's beloved just any way he looks, which is great. Soundwave is another one. People like Prime Soundwave, but I missed my boy when I was watching Prime. But yeah. And the last problem is it's a huge cost. Transformers G1 is one of the best shows because it has so many weirdos in it. Just a huge cast of weirdos. They made every character for that show. And you have people who are a fan of some niche guy who was in one episode, and they love him. And it was really successful as a marketing technique, actually, if we're going to be a class trader about it. So if you want to bring that huge cast back in, then you need something that diversifies them, but not in a way where if you're making toys, if you're making shapes, that you can't kind of like reuse assets. You can't reuse 3D models. You can't reuse toy pieces, wheels, that kind of thing. So yeah, one of the most successful, I have written down here, transformed animated rant. One of the most successful operations like this in the past, because, you know, in recent days, I've noticed that IDW and like toys and stuff like that have kind of abandoned the approach where the shapes are kind of diverse and where they look like different. They're relying a lot more on like G1 nostalgia, right? But the last time that they did try and do this, they did try and diversify the look of the cast while still having them be like blocks, was Transformers Animated, which is really famous design leap. And what Transformers Animated did, from what I can tell, just having a skim through some interviews and having a look at their concept art and the design notes from their lead designer, was that they started with these like really shape cars, you know, like really interesting shape cars, and then they built a figure out of that, right? So the cars weren't like a Honda Civic, you know, it was like a funny truck. it was a funny truck, and then they like built the shoulders and the legs and stuff out of that, which is really smart. It's really smart to work backwards from that. So that's something that I've tried to keep in mind, because, you know, if you wanted something like this to be practical, then that's a really good way of keeping that diversity, but still having them be blocks. I think my most successful implementation of this is my Constructicon design, which I haven't finished, obviously. Typical. I haven't finished designing them, but construction equipment and vehicles are really diverse, and different shapes, so you can get a lot of variation, right? Like Mixmaster has a giant cement mixer on his back, and it makes sense that that can move into his stomach and resemble a belly, and you get a more, you can have a fat transformer, which is really good because there's not a lot of them. A lot of transformer shapes are kind of like broad-shouldered and wasp waist, which is like, you know, great, I love that, but it's a bit shit for everyone else, which sucks. I did try the Transformers animated style when I was designing redesigning the protector bots for their Shattered Glass designs, but it didn't really work, because I'm also a big fan of the like adult tone of newer media, and the animated stuff does fall into that kind of like Teen Titans cheese, where you have like you know, it doesn't really like tonally fit, unfortunately, which is a shame. Oh, and last thing is, I also am really interested in seeing if they could be a 3D model, because the fun thing about a 3D model mesh is that if you have a similar base shape, if they have like a similar anatomical shape underneath it, then you can like stretch and pull bits of your mesh and shape them into new characters, and keep things like the rig, like the original rig, like all the fingers can like move in the same animation. You can save a lot of time in production, and that way you can also have like the big cast of the G1, but like still have diverse designs, which, you know, is a fun challenge and extremely difficult. Yeah, I do like to make life hard for myself. But anyway, moving on to Bridgman. Bridgman was where I went to next after I left what I learned from Animated behind. So Bridgman Anatomy is unfortunately a really good place to start learning how to draw the human figure in an interesting way while still keeping it like very anatomically shaped. And I say unfortunately because reading Bridgman raw is a bit like taking all your meds at once. It's not a good time. It was written in like in the 1900s or something, and it's really impenetrable. Luckily there is a guy on YouTube who did this amazing series on like deciphering it, but essentially the theory is he breaks down the anatomy into simple shapes, and if that sounds familiar, it's because if you've ever seen a torso or a pelvis that's a box for like a skeleton and how you start drawing, that's Bridgman. That's his theory, and it's kind of been simplified into something that's helpful, but not as helpful as it is with the rest of the context of like the actual anatomical theory. What Bridgman does is you start out with like the shape of a skeleton, and then you kind of like add meat chunks on top of it. You kind of like memorize where the meat chunks go, and then after that it becomes like distressingly easy to draw figures, to draw gestures, if that's the word. I didn't go to art school, sorry, this is completely unhinged. So yeah, it becomes really easy to do things like perspective and stuff like that, because you stop thinking about the human body as like a wet sack of meat, and you start thinking about it as shape. And so what I do here in this video is I start out with the skeleton, and then after that, you don't have to start out with the skeleton every time, but it is a good place to start learning Bridgman, is to kind of like learn what the like base looks like, because everyone's got a skeleton. I don't know if you're aware. You start out with a skeleton, and then after that, the meat, the anatomy, the muscles like slide into segments, and at one point I'm pretty sure I highlight like the movement of the muscles. I think a lot of people get really distressed when they're told to learn muscle groups, because it's like, do I have to learn all these different strengths? No, absolutely not. But when they segment in with one another, they pull like shapes. So when you see like an arm flexed or like compressed and stuff like that, those muscles bunch and pull apart like rubber, or maybe not rubber. And so I just kind of draw like a basic human body, and then I also draw how Bridgman does fat as well, because it's not just for like really lean muscle groups. That's a really helpful way to learn to draw, but Bridgman also teaches you how to draw softer shapes, right? So one of the benefits of drawing in like really chunky lean muscles is that when you start adding fat and softness to it, you can add a lot of like realistic looking human body parts. So moving on from that, one of the benefits of Bridgman is that you can take those chunks, take the shoulder, take the biceps, and you can like warp and distort them and make parts of them bigger and smaller, and you can get really interesting like human anatomy out of it. And that's kind of where I realized it would work for Transformers, because you could do that, you could make them bigger and smaller, but what if we replaced the shoulder with a wheel? And you just kept like the same segmentation, the same insertion of the muscle, but you replaced it with a mechanical object. And it worked. It was a huge success. I was really, really happy with that, because another benefit of Bridgman is that you can draw the outline of the shape and then refine inwards. So if you're super lazy like myself, then you can just sort of have your reference, the one that takes the longest, and then after that you can just draw the outline and then go inside, and it'll save you so much time. It's like an absolute speedrunning strat. And I just wanted to draw Bone Crusher real quick. He's got a real human shape to him. That's why I picked him. And just an example of what happens if you have a reference image handy, if you have a design that you've done in the past, how easy and how fast it is to draw them. So the next part is I kind of want to show how the muscle segmentation works and how I draw expressions. While I find I do use a lot of Bridgman techniques when I'm drawing my faces, and it does help with creating realistic expressions, it's not like the most important part. So I do outline here like the skull and the shape of the face, but the best thing you can do, instead of learning like real precise technical stuff about the face, is when you're drawing expressions, you should always make the expression that you're drawing with your own face, which I think a lot of people already instinctively do. But when you're doing it, try and feel the way that your muscles move in your face. And what I mean by that is when you're drawing, you're going to want to feel the way your eyebrows move, the way the tendons under your lip move. Does your nose crinkle? Do your eyes crinkle, kind of thing? That's going to be a much, much better tool for you when you're drawing your expressions. Way, way more helpful, I find, anyway, personally, than looking up expressions online, because when a lot of people are kind of having pictures of their face taken for references, they get a little too stiff, you know, like that. It's not very organic. But if you have super autism like I do, then you've probably spent a lot of time kind of like studying like the way your face moves, and when you interact with people, like muscle memory and things like that, concentrating on how you actually look when you're interacting with people. And in your day-to-day life, just pay attention to like the scrunch and pull of your face, because that's going to create like a really, really organic and like fun feel to your art, or your expressions anyway. And then moving on from my little skulls and stuff, is I just wanted to show the sketching process for Wild Rider. And this is only the beginning of how insane my reference setup gets. If at any point you're like, damn bitch, you live like this, like the answer is yeah I do. Unfortunately I'm a real mess when I'm drawing. you'll see it gets worse in the next video. But I wanted to design Wild Rider, and I wanted to give him kind of like a sick and twisted vibe. He's a trans mask guy. And I also wanted to show like the diversification of the face. I wanted to give him Southeast Asian features, sort of. That's the reference picture I pulled up is of a Japanese man, but the anatomical structure is pretty similar in Southeast Asian features. So I kind of knew what I was doing, and I showed that because I wanted him to have goggles. But I thought, like, what if one was smashed out on one side? And then I pulled up a Monster Energy hat, which I didn't end up using, which is a real shame, but I like the hat twisted on back. That's a fun motif, by the way. If you're designing a group of characters, it's really cool to have like recurring themes and stuff. Pick like a running theme, and then kind of like fold those elements into multiple of them. Like I know a lot of people like to do colors when they're redesigning the Gestalt, but like you should have fun stuff as well. You should have a bit of fun with it. So here's Knockout. This is really exciting. I really like this design. Knockout was kind of a bad choice for this video, because his design is so iconic, and his shape and his visuals is really, really untouchable. And I do love this IDW design, but what I mentioned before with a lot of the floating kibble, this could never be a toy, right? Because that looks like it wants to stab a child right now, which, you know, diversity win. Gay men can do whatever they want, but it probably wouldn't work in like an actual like feasible design for a toy. So, and I also wanted to give him a nose. This is a big thing. I'm giving all my characters noses because I like them. I think noses are fun, and they add a lot of character. They add a lot of character to a character design. And you'll start to welcome to Damn Bitch You Live Like This, the sequel. These reference images are just gonna start stacking up. It's not good. But it is fun to incorporate those elements. At one point, I took a break and I watched the Grand Budapest Hotel, and really, really funny show. Very, very knockout, very, very serendipity, and I just wanted to incorporate a little bit in there. So what I do initially, explaining the walkthrough, not ranting anymore, explaining the walkthrough process, is you start out with the marker sketch of like the silhouette and the shape. And I made this one kind of precise because I knew I was recording, but usually I'm super, super messy with this. This is not practical at all. And instead of drawing the skeleton, what I'll do is I'll just use strokes from the marker to like indicate where those muscle groups are. And I'll keep an eye on the silhouette of the character that I'm designing, or how big and how little I want them to be. And I'll just start like shaping them out. This is probably more obvious with my breakdown because I wanted him to be bigger, but I also couldn't just have like prime breakdown just standing there, you know, next to all these derby boys from the Gestalt theme that I'm working with. So I wanted him to kind of like have that prime shape, but I moved, instead of having those like big chunky prime floaty kibble bits, which I'm not a big fan of, I moved the like monster truck tires onto his shoulders, and it was a pretty good translation, and it was also smoother. Like, you know, a child will not choke on that. Thank goodness. That's not what we want. So have I brought little Naz out? Yeah, I brought little Naz in. I think that's cute. And so you can kind of see here, I just start working with an outline. I don't have a reference for knockout of my own design. And I just start like reworking the existing anatomy, existing design things. I start taking chunks from the car. I start like outlining if there's a part of the design that he already has that I don't like, then I'll look at the vehicle and I'll take a chunk from the vehicle that I picked, and I'll fold it in. And then at that point, it's just making him gayer, which is really, really great. Knockout and I have that in common. It's our only personality trait. So that's just what I wanted him to look a little fruity. And I think it worked out. He's got the talons, he's got the little boots. He's got that kind of like weird gay guy vibe where he like collects a bunch of pictures of stuff and like he talks for like 2 hours to random people at a bus stop. I think that's great. That's kind of what I wanted to capture in him anyway. And I think that kind of like accentuates him a little bit in a more interesting direction, because this is a little bit like visual redesign. I'm also like doing a little bit of character redesign where I want them to kind of fold together and into an interesting dynamic. So any characters where I feel like maybe they've got protagonist syndrome, right? Like they're supposed to have their own little stories. I give them a bit of a weirder personality to help them stand out. I didn't really need to do that with Knockout, but you know, whatever. The last part I kind of wanted to show off was the coloring section. I kind of skip a bit of this, but what happens, and this is a really, really fast way to do colors. Once again, if it takes longer than 5 seconds, I'm not interested. But what I do is I essentially, with the wand tool, with the lasso tool, whatever you've got handy. Sai is really good for this. Sai has a selection pen, which is great. Take a color, a flat color to the lot of it, maybe a couple different colors, and then after that, you can use the hue and saturation tool to change different sections. Like for example, I chose the usual parts, the skin, the thighs, the arms, the bits that fold into the car and you don't actually see. And I lightened it up in the hue saturation slider. And what that does is, if you're like me and you're shit with colors, then that will sort of like organically fold the colors into a more cohesive feel without having to put like an overlay layer over the top or anything like that. It's really, really fast. And then from there, once you have all those colors like sectioned out and like adjusted to what you'd like, then you just kind of like blend the line art layer together, and then you can go in and you can clean up. So this is still a sketch, but you can create something that feels like it had effort in it. By going in over the top and like refining lines, refining details, the eyes, the mouth, the important things, you know, the things that eyes are attracted to. Anything that's messy or has like loose geometry, you can clean up. Yeah, so that is kind of like everything. And I really, really hope this helps, because I'm having a lot of fun with this right now. It's really fun to explore, it's really fun to redesign, and I'm looking at a bunch of different fun projects as well. I want to do a game that I would really like to do when I have some more time. But yeah, thank you.